The Coral is the third release in 6Zero's Next Gem series following the Ruby Pro and Opal, and it's 6Zero's second full foam paddle. My testing puts this paddle in the boundary between all court and power, and it'll appeal to players seeking a softer feeling paddle with good control and power that's there with intent. Let's get into it. First, a disclosure. 6Zero gave me these paddles to test with zero obligations, no money changed hands, and they didn't influence or preview this video. If you do use my affiliate code though, you'll get a discount and I'll earn a commission that does help support this channel. So the Coral retails for $200 and you can take 10% off with my code Johnkew. So it comes in 3 shapes, so elongated, hybrid, and wide body, and I'll put the dimensions on the screen here for you. The elongated and wide body are new shapes to 6Zero, and all 3 shapes feature the classic taper that 6Zero introduced on their hybrid shape from the beginning, and all 3 shapes have that arrow curve top. And lastly, there are 3 colorways to choose from, so blue, pink, and black. So the Coral is 6Zero's second full foam paddle right behind the black Opal. I'll put the X-ray up on the screen here so you can follow along. It does use an EPP center core, so expanded polypropylene surrounded by a floating EVA foam band. And there's another band of EPP foam outside of that EVA band, which surrounds the entire paddle face and does extend down into the handle. Lastly, there's a carbon fiber wrapped, what we're calling sushi roll of expanding edge foam around the entire perimeter, which is the signature of a thermoformed paddle. And since it's thermoformed, there are some perks like how the paddle feels more consistent across the entire face. There also seems to be some internal perimeter weighting at 4 and 8 o'clock, judging from those bright strips in the X-ray, which are probably some extra carbon fiber. If you zoom into the center core on this X-ray, you can see what 6Zero calls their tectonic core, which is basically a grid of small incisions cut into the EPP foam to increase dwell time. They're also using their diamond tough grit on the surface, which I think will be one of their most appealing features of this paddle for most players, both for its elite spin potential and promise for longer lasting texture. And I do like this idea. So with traditional raw carbon fiber paddles, this peel ply just molds epoxy into a textured cloth-like pattern. But as the epoxy wears down, that texture slowly disappears. 6Zero's approach still uses peel ply, but the difference is that as the epoxy wears away, more embedded grit becomes exposed. So in theory, that should help the surface maintain its bite for longer. It's a smart idea, but we'll need more testing before we can say for sure that it outlasts raw carbon fiber textures. All right, let's move on to how these paddles actually perform in testing. I'll start with the radar gun results and then we'll walk through the full breakdown. So spin, power, pop, maneuverability, and sweet spot. And last but definitely not least, I'll get into the Q-Core cannon results. So for anyone who hasn't seen these graphics before, or maybe you just need a quick refresher, here's how to read them. Up on top, you're looking at the raw performance numbers, and the radar chart down below shows where each of these numbers ranks compared to more than 300 paddles in my database. The left side of the chart represents firepower, the top right highlights control and forgiveness, and the bottom portion gives you a read on maneuverability and hand speed. And if you want to create charts like these for the Coral or for hundreds of others, you can head on over to JohnKewPickleball.com. The link's in the description. Now, digging into the numbers, all 3 Coral shapes land right near the boundary between all court and power paddles. Their power and pop percentiles sit in the mid to upper 70s across the board. For overall firepower, the elongated, hybrid, and wide body come in at 78, 79, and 75 respectively. And spin is solid on all 3, clocking in the high 2100 RPM range. That translates into spin metascores in the mid 80s. And for context, that's pretty much right in the middle of where most raw carbon fiber paddles land. All 3 paddles, even the elongated, have relatively low swing weights. The wide body comes in at 109, the hybrid at 113, and the elongated is actually slightly lower than the hybrid at 112. That's because the elongated is only about a 1/16 of an inch longer than the hybrid, and it has a longer handle, which slightly reduces the face size and helps keep the swing weight down. And twist weight is where the real separation happens. The elongated has the lowest twist weight at 6.0, while the wide body is way up at 7.5. The hybrid lands right in between at 6.7. And that's why the wide body feels noticeably more forgiving than the elongated, especially on off-center hits. So to sum it all up, the 3 Coral shapes offer excellent hand speed and maneuverability, but you do give up a noticeable amount of lateral stability and forgiveness with the elongated shape, which for most players will feel like a smaller sweet spot. The hybrid and wide body are clearly more forgiving on mishits, and across the board you're getting solid spin and firepower that sits right on that all-court power line with fairly balanced power and pop profiles on all three paddles. So next, I ran all three paddles through my ball cannon to measure Q-core. And if you're new to that term, Q-core is my own version of the USAP's PB-core rating, or what UPAA refers to as PEF. In simple terms, it measures how much energy the paddle returns to the ball, or put another way, a firepower score. On this chart, you can see all three coral shapes landing between 0.39 and 0.40, which puts them in the lower end of the high power category. A 0.39 sits right at the boundary between all court and power, which lines up well with the rest of my data. The 0.40 reading, though, feels a bit high compared to my radar gun testing and my on-court impressions. My best explanation for this is that the performance location, so the exact spot on the face that produced the highest Q-core score, is about 5 inches down from the top of the paddle on all three shapes, so closer to the center of the face. I tend to make contact a little higher on the paddle, nearer to the tip, which may be why the Canon data slightly overstates the power relative to how the paddles feel in actual play. And so what this really tells us is that the power potential of the hybrid and the elongated shapes may be a bit higher than what I personally was able to fully access during play. When you combine Q-core results with the radar gun data into a single firepower metascore, here's how things shake out. The elongated and hybrid both come in at 74, and the wide body checks in at a 62. And for context, the elongated and hybrid numbers line up very closely with paddles like the Honolulu J2FC and the Proton Flamingo. Meanwhile, the wide body coral lands closest to paddles such as the Honolulu J2FC Plus and the Pickleball Apes Charm. Okay, so compared to the Selkirk Boomstick, which I've been using as my main paddle for the past several weeks, the coral has noticeably less firepower, especially in the pop department, and it's clearly easier to control than is the Boomstick. I found myself feeling more comfortable in the midcourt, just resetting shots until I eventually got something low enough to move forward to the kitchen. And that ability to simply hold the paddle out and let it absorb the pace and then drop the ball into the kitchen was much easier with the coral than with my Boomstick. On the flip side, it was a lot harder to put balls away or surprise opponents into popping something up. There's always trade-offs. And shaping the ball with the coral also felt good. The spin is solid, not elite tier, but definitely enough to get noticeable dip on the ball or drive deep with slice. And one thing I've started noticing with the Diamond Tough Grit is how consistent it is across the entire court. So it does grab the ball on these big serves and drives, but also on quicker flicks at the kitchen. So with traditional raw carbon fiber paddles, that flick spin is usually the first thing to fade even after just a few hours because those sharp epoxy ridges begin to wear down. So you can get good spin on heavier shots with dwell and grab, but I tend to lose confidence that my flicks won't sail long once that texture wears down. But with the coral and with the black opal, which uses that same Diamond Tough Grit, I've put in dozens of hours and I still haven't seen a meaningful drop in flick spin. Now, the coral's grit is noticeably lighter than the early opal prototypes due to recent regulatory crackdown, so long-term durability still has to be proven, but so far I am optimistic. So overall, I had a lot of fun with these paddles, exploring a more balanced playstyle between offense and defense. And as I mentioned earlier, the coral strikes a really clean balance between power and pop. It doesn't lean too heavily in either direction. The paddle won't generate all the power for you, but with a full swing, there's enough there for most players. And the pop you get with shorter strokes isn't just overwhelming, but it is enough to be intentionally offensive. In terms of feel, the coral has a softer touch with a medium dense response, leaning more towards the dense side than the hollow side. So as you can see on this new feel map that I made, that places the coral in quadrant C, soft plus dense, which most players describe as plush, muted, and dampened. It's a feel many consider to be more arm-friendly and even a bit pillow-like. When it comes to modifications, there's actually a lot of room to add perimeter weighting to all three of these shapes, since they all start out with relatively low swing weights. On the elongated, I added 3-gram pods at the 3 and 9 o'clock positions, and that bumped the swing weight up to 117 and the twist weight to 6.6. The result was a slightly broader sweet spot without making the paddle feel overly head heavy. For the hybrid, I went a step further and stacked 2 3-gram pods on each side, again at 3 and 9 o'clock, doubling up the weight. That pushed the swing weight up to 119, which may be a little high for some players, but the payoff is a massive twist weight of 7.7. That extra mass adds real plow through and significantly improves stability and performance on off-center shots. And with the wide body, I took a lighter touch, mainly because I think the stock version already plays pretty well. So my goal here was to preserve the low swing weight and add a bit more twist weight and slightly raise the balance point. So personally, very low balance points that you see on wide body paddles tend to throw off my timing. And I do feel like I lose some of that whip and leverage I get with longer paddles. So adding weight higher up on the paddle face does tend to shift that balance point upward, which makes the paddle feel better in motion, at least for me. So I added 2.5-inch strips of 0.5 gram per inch tuning tape to the upper sides of the paddle, starting just below the corner curves. That brought the swing weight up to 110 and the twist weight up to 7.8. So the end result was an even larger sweet spot and a paddle that feels a little more whippy with improved plow through, all without sacrificing the maneuverability that makes the wide body so appealing in the first place. Okay, so here are my final thoughts on the 6-0 Coral. To me, it's refreshing to see a full foam floating core paddle that was built differently from most of what's out there right now. So when you look at x-rays of many of the existing full foam paddles out there right now, they tend to look almost identical, like they're all working off the same blueprint. There's definitely variation in how they play, but they're largely iterating on the same core concept. But the Coral feels like it was developed in parallel rather than in lockstep with the rest of the market. It ultimately lands in a similar performance zone, but it gets there through a noticeably different design approach. Now, that won't matter to everyone, but I personally appreciate the R&D that went into it. That said, the Coral is stepping into a very crowded full foam category, and there are a lot of excellent options in the space. It sits right on that all-court to power boundary alongside paddles like the Honolulu J2FC and FC Plus and the Harmony. And if you expand that to Gen 3 paddles, you have the 11624 Power and Alpha Pro Power series, the Proton Flamingo, the Franklin C45, and some others. In terms of direct competition, I'd say the Coral lines up most closely with the Honolulu FC Plus in both performance and feel. So they're nearly the same price, with the Honolulu being about $5 cheaper, and both lean softer and slightly denser, and both offer good dwell. So honestly, they're both very solid options. If I had to point to what the Coral brings that the FC Plus doesn't, it would be the incised core, which may add a bit more dwell, and the Diamond Tough grit, which has the potential to be a more durable grit than raw carbon fiber. So we'll learn more about the long-term durability of the Diamond Tough grit as more testing comes in, but for now, you're making a call based on early data. The graphic design is also completely different between the Honolulu and the Coral, so aesthetics may play a role in your decision as well. So overall, even in a competitive field, I think the Coral is well positioned as a strong alternative for players looking for a friendly entry into the full foam category. It does offer some genuinely interesting technology, and I think that will appeal to a wide range of players. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.